The morning sun slid gently through the frosted windows of the small suburban home, painting the living room in golden streaks. It was Christmas Day, the day everyone had been waiting for, the day meant to be filled with joy, laughter, and family warmth. The tree stood tall in the corner, its lights twinkling faintly, surrounded by a mountain of neatly wrapped presents. Maya sat cross-legged on the rug, her heart hopeful, though a little nervous as always. She carefully unwrapped the gift that had been handed to her by her parents. The shiny red paper crinkled as she peeled it away. Inside, she found a small plastic jewelry box set, the kind you might find in a discount store for a few dollars. She held it in her hands, smiled politely, and whispered, "Thank you." Across the room, her younger sister Sienna squealed with excitement. Their father handed her the keys to a brand new Tesla Model 3, parked outside with a massive red bow on top. Everyone clapped, cheered, and rushed to the window to look at the shining silver car parked in the driveway. Sienna jumped to her feet, hugging their parents tightly, shouting, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this. Thank you so much." Her mother's eyes sparkled as she replied, "You deserve it, sweetheart. You've been working so hard on your modeling career, and you need something reliable to get you to auditions and events." Maya sat quietly, holding her little jewelry box. She glanced at her parents, waiting for them to acknowledge her too. But they were too busy taking photos of Sienna holding up the car keys, laughing, and already planning the first drive. Her father turned briefly and said, "Maya, you're responsible and practical. You don't need something flashy. That little gift will remind you to stay organized." His words stung more than he realized. The difference was loud, though nobody said it aloud. Sienna was treated like the golden child, the star of the family, the one who deserved expensive gifts, attention, and admiration. Maya, on the other hand, was expected to stay quiet, grateful, and invisible. The room buzzed with excitement as everyone surrounded Sienna, asking about the car features, the color she had chosen, and how she would decorate it. Their uncle even joked, "Well, Sienna's officially the princess now." Everyone laughed. Everyone except Maya. She sat back, her smile frozen, but her eyes heavy. She wanted to be happy for her sister, she really did. But deep down, she couldn't shake the hollow feeling in her chest. It wasn't about the car. It was about being unseen, year after year, moment after moment. Christmas was supposed to be about love and family, but for her, it had become a cruel reminder of where she stood. Maya's hands tightened around the little jewelry box. It wasn't the gift itself that hurt. It was the message behind it. She had worked hard all year, taking on long hours at her new job, paying off her student loans, even helping with groceries when her parents were short. None of that seemed to matter. To her parents, she was always the reliable one, the one who needed less, the one who would be fine. She excused herself quietly, slipping into the kitchen. From there, she could still hear Sienna's laughter and the clicking of phones snapping photos. She leaned against the counter, her breath shaky. Her eyes landed on the refrigerator, covered in magnets holding up Sienna's modeling posters, glossy photos of her smiling on runways, and clippings of her features in local magazines. There wasn't a single photo of Maya. Not one. She thought, back to her own recent achievement, her promotion at the architectural firm. It had taken years of study, sacrifice, and late nights to earn it. Yet when she had shared the news last week, her parents barely reacted. Her mother had only said, "That's nice, honey," before changing the subject to Sienna's latest photo shoot. In that moment, standing alone in the kitchen while her family celebrated her sister, Maya felt something inside her break quietly. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was sharp and deep. She returned to the living room, masking her emotions behind a careful smile. She placed the jewelry box gently on the table beside her. No one noticed. Their laughter continued, the excitement carried on, and the camera flash kept capturing moments she wasn't part of. For Maya, Christmas morning had revealed the truth more clearly than ever before. She wasn't the daughter to be celebrated. She was the daughter expected to endure. But deep inside, a small spark began to flicker. A thought that whispered, "This doesn't have to be forever." Maya stood at the edge of the living room, still clutching the little jewelry box. The laughter around Sienna's new car carried on like music at a party she hadn't been invited to. But this wasn't the first time. In fact, it was just another chapter in a story. Maya had been living her whole life, being overshadowed. She looked down at the jewelry box again, then at the tree with its glittering lights. Underneath, there were still presents piled high. Thought about the ones she had carefully wrapped herself, the gifts she had chosen with thought and heart. For her mother, she had saved up to buy a beautiful silk scarf imported from Italy, in her favorite color, deep emerald green. It had taken Maya weeks of searching to find something both elegant and meaningful, something her mother would treasure. For her father, she had bought a first-edition book from his favorite author, a collector's piece she found after months of hunting online. She had paid extra to have it delivered in time for Christmas. For Sienna, despite the hurt she often felt, Maya had chosen something personal too. She had spent hours designing a custom-made leather portfolio, embossed with her sister's initials, where she could keep her modeling contracts and photographs. It was expensive, but Maya told herself it was worth it. After all, family was family. She had wrapped each gift with care, adding little handwritten notes under the ribbons. She wanted them to feel special, wanted them to know she cared. She hoped maybe this time they would see her. But as she watched, Sienna posed with her car keys for another picture, Maya knew deep down what would happen. Her gifts would be opened politely, smiled at briefly, then forgotten. Her mind drifted back to a week ago, sitting in her office at the architectural firm. She'd stayed late that evening, finishing a complex design that had impressed the board. Her boss had walked in, smiled, and handed her the letter she'd been dreaming of for years. A promotion to senior structural engineer. It wasn't just a new title. It meant recognition, respect, and a raise that would finally give her stability. She remembered calling her parents right after. Her voice had been full of excitement as she said, "Mom, Dad, I got the promotion. Senior engineer, can you believe it?" Her mother had paused, then replied with a distracted tone. "That's nice, honey. Did you hear? Sienna just got invited to a magazine shoot in New York." Her father had chuckled and said, "We'll celebrate when you come home for Christmas, okay?" But she knew they wouldn't. That phone call had stayed with her carving, a silent wound in her heart. She wanted them to be proud of her, just once. She wanted them to see how hard she had worked, how she had balanced classes, jobs, and bills without anyone's help. But their attention always circled back to Sienna, like a compass pointing north. Maya sat quietly on the couch as her sister's laughter filled the room. She tried to remind herself that she wasn't doing these things for recognition. She gave because she loved, because it mattered to her. But still, a question lingered. How long could she keep pouring her heart out without anything coming back? Her parents finally began unwrapping the gifts she had bought. Her mother unfolded the silk scarf, eyes widening for just a second, before she nodded politely. "Thank you, Maya. That's very thoughtful." She set it aside quickly to glance at Sienna's Instagram post. Her father smiled at the book, flipping through a few pages. "Oh, this is nice. I'll add it to the shelf." Then he leaned over to talk to Sienna about how she should drive safely in her new Tesla. Finally, Sienna opened her gift. She ran her fingers across the embossed leather. "Oh, wow, thanks." Her tone was flat, distracted, as if her mind was already elsewhere. The portfolio went back into the box almost immediately. Maya's chest tightened. She forced a smile, but her stomach churned. Hours of effort, weeks of planning, months of saving, dismissed in moments. That night, after the Christmas dinner plates were cleared, and the laughter around Sienna's car had finally faded into quiet conversations, Maya sat alone in her childhood bedroom. The walls were still painted pale blue, the same color she had chosen at 13, but the space felt smaller now, almost suffocating. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the little jewelry box on her nightstand. It sat there like a symbol, cheap plastic under the soft glow of the lamp. The voices from the living room drifted down the hall, her parents still talking excitedly about how Sienna would look driving the Tesla to her next photo shoot. Maya heard her father's proud voice, her mother's endless praise. Not once did her name come up. She picked up the jewelry box and turned it in her hands, the lid squeaking as it opened and shut. For a moment, she felt like a child again, waiting for someone to notice her, waiting for approval that never came. The ache in her chest grew heavier, with every sound of her family celebrating without her. She stood up and walked to the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes tired and shoulders slumped. She whispered to herself, almost as if saying it out loud would make it real. "Why am I still here?" It wasn't about the gifts or the money. It was about never being seen. She had built a career, a life, a name for herself, and yet in this house she was still just the other daughter. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't spill. She was too used to holding them back. She sat down again, this time pulling her suitcase from under the bed. It had been tucked away for years, dusty and unused, but now it felt like the most important thing in the room. She unzipped it slowly, the sound sharp in the quiet night. She began folding clothes with deliberate care, not rushing, not second-guessing. Every shirt she packed felt like another piece of her detaching from the weight of this house. Down the hall, Sienna's laugh rang out again, and Maya froze for a moment. A part of her wanted to storm into the living room, to shout, to tell them how much they had hurt her. But another part, the quieter, steadier part, told her it wouldn't matter. They wouldn't hear her. They never had. Silence, she realized, could be louder than any words. She placed her work laptop gently into the suitcase, then added the scarf her best friend Monica had given her last month. It reminded her that there were people who saw her, people who valued her. She packed her toiletries, her favorite book, a photo of her and Monica from their college graduation. She didn't take much else. She didn't want to. When the suitcase was finally zipped, she pulled out her house key. She held it in her hand for a long moment. That key had always represented safety, belonging, a place to come back to. But tonight, It felt heavy, like a chain. She placed it on her desk, next to the jewelry box. One represented her place in the family, the other represented her worth in their eyes. She didn't need either anymore. The clock read 2:15 a.m. when she finally slipped her coat on and pulled the suitcase quietly down the hall. She paused at the living room doorway. Her parents had fallen asleep on the couch, Sienna scrolling through her phone, probably posting more photos off her car. The glow from the tree lights cast soft shadows across their faces. For a second, Maya's chest tightened. They looked so peaceful, so ordinary. It would be easier to stay, to pretend this didn't hurt, to accept her place in their world. But deep inside, she knew staying would only crush her more. She turned away without a word. At the front door, she took one last look around. The stockings still hung over the fireplace. The smell of pine still lingered in the air, but it didn't feel like home anymore. She opened the door slowly, the cold air rushing against her skin. For the first time that night, she took a deep breath that didn't feel heavy. Dragging her suitcase across the icy driveway, she unlocked her old Honda parked on the street. It wasn't shiny, it didn't have a bow, and it wasn't anyone's dream car. But it was hers. She slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and let the soft hum fill the silence. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, long and uncertain. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she knew, one thing for certain, she was done waiting for their approval. She was done being invisible. As the house disappeared in the rearview mirror, she whispered softly to herself, "I'm free." For the first time in years, she felt lighter. The road stretched out before her, empty and wide, waiting for her to decide where it would lead, and for once, she was the one holding the map. As Maya drove through the empty streets, the glow of Christmas lights blurred past her window. Each house she passed was warm and bright, filled with laughter and gatherings she could almost hear through the glass. Inside her old Honda, though, it was quiet, just the soft hum of the heater and the steady rhythm of her thoughts. The further she went from home, the heavier the memories pressed against her chest. It wasn't just tonight. It had never been just tonight. Christmas had only peeled away the thin layer she'd been using to cover years of favoritism, years of being the daughter who was fine. Every mile she drove pulled more memories out of her, each one like an old wound reopening. She thought, first of childhood. She remembered one of Sienna's birthdays. Their parents had rented out an entire skating rink, filled it with balloons and music, invited dozens of kids. Sienna had twirled around in a brand new dress, glowing with all the attention. Maya, who was 2 years older, had watched from the sidelines, her own birthday only a week earlier still fresh in her mind. That year, her party had been a plain cake at the kitchen table and a single toy from the discount aisle. She had been grateful, then, but even as a child, she had noticed the difference. The pattern grew sharper as they got older. At her high school graduation, Maya had walked across the stage with honors. She looked into the crowd, scanning for her parents, but her seat remained empty. They had chosen to drive Sienna to a soccer tournament instead. It was important for her future, they had explained later, handing Maya a small card with a rushed, "We're proud of you," written inside. She had smiled and told them it was fine, but the truth was it had carved a hollow place in her heart that never quite healed. College years had been worse. Maya had juggled 3 part-time jobs, studying late into the night, paying her tuition through scholarships and loans. She remembered walking past her parents' kitchen one summer and overhearing them discussing how they had wired money to Sienna, who was studying art abroad in Paris. They had covered Harrent, her travel, her classes, all with excitement and pride in their voices. Maya had never asked for help, but the sting came from knowing they hadn't even offered. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as she remembered one winter break during college. Sienna had flown home, parents throwing a welcome party, relatives, invited gifts piled high. When Maya returned home from her night shift at the bookstore, her mother barely looked up before saying, "Oh, you're back already. Heat up some food if you're hungry." That night, she ate alone in the kitchen while her family laughed in the living room. The memories came faster now, overlapping, each one feeding into the next. The Christmas when she had saved to buy her father a leather watch, only for him to tell her she shouldn't spend money on him, then turning around to gush over Sienna's handmade painting. The summer when Maya had landed an internship with a top architectural firm, and her mother had dismissed it with, "That's nice, but look, Sienna just got her first modeling contract." Her chest ached, but she kept driving. Snowflakes tapped against the windshield, glowing under the headlights like sparks. She realized that the favoritism had never been about money alone. It was in the words, the attention, the way her parents' eyes lit up when Sienna entered the room, but barely flickered for her. Maya thought of tonight again, the scarf she had bought her mother, the book for her father, the leather portfolio for her sister. Weeks of planning, savings from her own pocket, all brushed aside within seconds. She could still hear her mother's distracted, "That's thoughtful," her father's quick, "That's nice." She had smiled, swallowed the hurt, and played her part, just as she always had. But leaving tonight, slipping out into the cold, was her way of saying she couldn't play it anymore. Tears blurred her vision, and she blinked them away, focusing on the road. She thought of all the years she had carried the quiet weight of being overlooked. She had told herself it didn't matter, that she was strong enough to handle it, that being the dependable one was something to be proud of. But now, for the first time, she admitted to herself that it had mattered all along. That little girl who sat at the kitchen table with a plain cake while her sister had balloons deserved better. That teenager who searched the crowd for her parents at graduation deserved better. That young woman working 3 jobs while her sister lived in Paris deserved better. Her throat tightened, but with it came a strange sense of clarity. These memories, though painful, weren't just chains anymore. They were proof. Proof that she had endured. Proof that she had survived without the praise or recognition she craved. She'd built a career, carved her own path, and kept moving despite the silence. The road stretched on, long and empty, and for the first time, she began to think of it not as an escape, but as a beginning. The favoritism had shaped her, but it didn't have to define her future. She could choose differently now. She could choose to build a life where she wasn't invisible, where her worth wasn't measured by comparison. She took a deep breath, the steering wheel steady under her hands. The memories still hurt, but mixed with the pain was something new, a quiet determination. She whispered into the empty car, "No more." And as the miles carried her further from the house where she had never truly been seen, Maya began to imagine a world where she could finally see herself. The phone sat heavy in Maya's hand as she drove into the night. The snow was falling harder now, little flecks of white streaking past her headlights. For a while, she tried to convince herself she could handle this on her own, that she didn't need anyone, that silence and distance were enough. But the truth pressed on her chest, thick and suffocating. She had carried the weight of being overlooked her entire life. And now, alone in her car on Christmas Eve, it felt unbearable. Her thumb hovered over the screen. A list of contacts stared back at her. She scrolled past coworkers, distant cousins, old classmates. None of them felt right. None of them knew the parts of her story that mattered. Then her eyes landed on one name: Monica. Monica had been her best friend since high school. Back then, when Maya's parents missed her graduation, it had been Monica who clapped the loudest in the audience. When Maya worked late nights in college, Monica had brought her coffee and sat beside her while she studied. They had drifted apart in recent years. Jobs, distance, busy schedules, but the bond was still there, woven deep into their history. Her finger hesitated, then tapped the name. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. For a second, she thought it would go to voicemail, and she almost hung up. But then, a familiar voice came through the line. "Maya? It's late. Are you okay?" The concern in Monica's tone cracked something inside her. Maya opened her mouth, but at first, no words came out, only a shaky breath. I didn't know who else to call," she finally whispered. "What happened?" Monica asked gently. Maya gripped the steering wheel tighter. The words spilled out in pieces, uneven and raw. "I left home, Christmas dinner. It was just..." She swallowed hard. "It was too much. They don't even see me, Monica. They never have. Tonight, it felt like I didn't exist." There was silence on the other end for a moment, not the cold kind, but the soft, thoughtful kind. Then Monica spoke, her voice steady and warm. "Maya, you've carried this alone for too long. I remember how it was, even back then. The way they treated your sister like the center of the world, and you, like the shadow in the corner. I saw it even if you never said much." Maya's throat tightened. "It sounds so childish when I say it out loud, like I'm just jealous or bitter." "No," Monica said firmly. "It's not childish. It's real. You've been hurting for years, and nobody gave you space to admit it. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Tears slid down Maya's cheeks, hot against the cold of the car. She hadn't realized how badly she needed someone to validate her pain until now. For years, she had convinced herself she was fine, that being strong meant being silent. But Monica's words cracked open a truth she had buried. She wasn't fine. And she didn't have to pretend anymore. "Where are you now?" Monica asked softly. "Driving," Maya said, her voice low. "I don't even know where. I just left." "Good," Monica replied. "Leaving was the right thing. You don't owe them your presence if it hurts you, but you don't have to be alone tonight either. Come here. My apartment. I'll make some tea, we'll talk, or sit in silence, whatever you need. Just don't sit in that car by yourself." Maya let out a shaky laugh, the first hint of relief she'd felt all night. "You don't mind? It's Christmas." "Eve, I mind if you don't come," Monica said quickly. "Maya, you've always been there for everyone else, even when they didn't notice. Let someone be there for you this time." The line grew quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt safe. Maya thought about the warmth of Monica's apartment, the steady comfort of someone who knew her history, without needing long explanations. She thought about how different it felt to be seen, even through a phone line, compared to the empty look she'd received all night from her family, "I'll come," Maya said finally. Her voice was small, but it carried something it hadn't before. Choice. As she turned the car around, heading toward the city lights, she realized that reaching out hadn't been weakness, it had been strength. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight alone. Her heart still ached, but in a different way. It wasn't just pain now. It was also hope. Maybe healing didn't come from fixing the past or forcing her family to change. Maybe it came from finding people who truly saw her and letting their presence fill the spaces where her family's love had always been absent. When she pulled onto the highway, the snow easing into a soft drift, she felt lighter. She wasn't healed, not yet. But she wasn't invisible anymore. Monica had seen her, heard her, understood her. That was enough for tonight. For the first time in a long time, Maya didn't feel like she was running away. She felt like she was running toward something. Snow still clung to Maya's coat as she climbed the steps of Monica's apartment. Her body felt heavy, but her mind was sharper than it had been in hours. Inside, the small living room was warm, the smell of chamomile tea drifting through the air. Monica guided her to the couch without asking too many questions, just placing a blanket around her shoulders and sitting close enough for comfort. For a long while, they didn't speak. The hum of the heater filled the silence, and Maya let herself breathe. Finally, Monica leaned forward, her eyes calm but firm. "You've been carrying this for years. Tonight just broke the surface. But you can't keep running from it forever." Maya held the mug of tea between her hands, staring into the steam. "I don't even know what I'd say if I confronted them. Part of me wants to scream. Part of me wants to just disappear and never look back." "That's exactly why you need to face it," Monica said. "Not for them, for you. To put the words out there, to make them hear you." The thought scared Maya. She wasn't used to being heard. Every time she had tried to speak up in the past, her words had been brushed aside or twisted into complaints. But Monica's voice carried a kind of certainty that planted itself inside her. For the first time, Maya considered that maybe confrontation wasn't about changing her family. Maybe it was about claiming her own truth. That night, as she lay on the couch under Monica's blanket, she thought about what it would feel like to finally say the things she had kept buried. She imagined her mother's startled face, her father's silence, Sienna's disbelief. She didn't know if they would apologize or if they would even understand. But maybe that didn't matter. Maybe speaking out loud was the first step to letting go of the hold their favoritism had on her. The next morning, the city streets were slick with melted snow. Maya borrowed Monica's scarf and headed back to her parents' house. Each block she drove made her chest tighter, but underneath the fear was a pulse of determination. She had left last night feeling invisible. She wasn't going to walk back, in the same way. When she opened the door, the warmth of the house hit her, mixed with the smell of cinnamon rolls. Her parents sat at the table, Sienna scrolling through her phone. All three of them looked up, surprise flickering across their faces. "You're back," her mother said carefully, as if unsure of her mood. Maya hung her coat on the chair. Her hands shook, but she kept her voice steady. "We need to talk." They stared at her. For once, no one interrupted. She took a breath and let the words come. "Last night wasn't just about Christmas. It was about every year, every time I've been made to feel like I don't matter. You've celebrated Sienna, lifted her up, made her the center of everything. And me? I've been the shadow in the room, The one you didn't clap for, the one you forgot to show up for, the one who was always told, "You're fine, I'm not fine. I never was." Her father shifted uncomfortably. Her mother opened her mouth, but Maya held up her hand. "Please, let me finish. I'm not saying this because I want pity or because I hate Sienna. I love her. But your favoritism has hurt me for years, and I can't keep pretending it hasn't." The room fell quiet, heavy with her words. For the first time, she saw her mother's face soften with something like guilt. Sienna looked startled, as if the idea had never even crossed her mind. "You should have told us sooner," her father muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "I tried," Maya replied, her voice breaking. "You just didn't listen." The silence stretched again, but this time it didn't feel like a dismissal. It felt like a wound finally exposed to light. She didn't know if they would change. Maybe they wouldn't. But at least she had spoken, and the weight wasn't locked inside her anymore. Her mother finally whispered, "I didn't realize," and trailed off. Maya shook her head gently. "That's the point. You didn't realize because you never looked. But I'm done waiting for you to see me. From now on, I'll make sure I see myself." Her heart was racing, her palms damp, but beneath the nerves was a strange relief. She hadn't collapsed. She hadn't disappeared. She had spoken, and the world hadn't ended. Sienna finally spoke, her voice small. "Maya, I never wanted to take anything from you. Maya cut her off softly. "It's not about you, Sienna. It's about them. And it's about me learning to stop comparing my worth to how they treat us." Her mother's eyes glistened. Her father stared at his hands, and the kitchen clock ticked in. Maybe the silence meant they were thinking. Maybe it meant they were ashamed, or maybe it meant nothing at all. Either way, Maya realized, it didn't change her decision. She stood up, her body steadier than when she had arrived. "I said what I needed to say. What you do with it is up to you. But I'm not invisible anymore." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in years, they belonged entirely to her. As she walked out the door, the cold air rushed against her face, but it didn't sting the way it had last night. This time she felt lighter. The door closed, softly behind Maya, and for a moment she just stood there on the porch, breathing in the cold winter air. The world outside was quiet, the snow lying heavy on rooftops and trees, muffling the usual sounds of the street. Her heart was still racing, but there was a calmness beneath it too, a steadiness she hadn't felt in years. She had finally spoken, finally laid her truth bare, and no one could take that away. She walked slowly to her car, brushing snow off the windshield with her sleeve. Her hands trembled less now, not from nerves but from the release of carrying so much for so long. She didn't know what her parents were thinking inside the house. She didn't know if they would ever change, or if they would try to patch the hurt that had settled between them. But strangely, that uncertainty didn't scare her anymore. Driving away, she thought about the look on her mother's face when she had spoken, the flicker of guilt, the softening around her eyes. She thought about her father's silence, the way he had avoided her gaze. And she thought about Sienna's confusion, maybe even regret. They had all looked at her differently, even if they hadn't known what to say. Maybe they were realizing, for the first time, how much she had carried in silence. But Maya also knew this wasn't about waiting for their apology, or hoping they would treat her differently now. It was about her. Speaking her truth had been a line drawn in the snow. She wasn't the quiet daughter in the shadows anymore. She was a woman who had finally found her voice. By the time she reached Monica's apartment again, the city lights glowed against the falling snow. Monica opened the door before Maya even knocked, her face warm with concern. Without a word, Maya stepped into her arms. "You did it, didn't you?" Monica asked gently. Maya nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Tears welled up again, but these were different from the ones she had shed the night before. They weren't heavy with shame or loneliness. They were lighter, almost cleansing. "I told them everything," she whispered finally. "Not because I thought they'd fix it, but because I had to. For me." Monica smiled softly. "That's all that matters. You finally gave your pain a voice." They spent the rest of the evening together, not dissecting every detail, but simply sitting, in the comfort of each other's presence. They drank tea, watched the snow pile higher on the windowsill, and let the quiet wrap around them. For once, Maya didn't feel like she had to explain herself or prove her worth. She was enough, exactly as she was. That night, as she lay on Monica's couch again, Maya thought about the Christmases ahead. Maybe she wouldn't spend them in her parents' house anymore. Maybe she would create new traditions, with Monica, with friends, with people who saw her for who she truly was. She didn't have to keep walking into rooms where she was invisible. She could choose differently. The next morning, sunlight streamed across the frosted glass. Maya woke with a sense of clarity. Her family might never fully understand her pain, but that was no longer her responsibility to fix. Healing, she realized, was not about rewriting the past, but about building a future where she felt whole. As she sipped her coffee, she wrote a note in her journal. "I am not invisible. I am not the forgotten one. I am me, and that is enough." The words felt simple, but they held the weight of everything she had survived. Christmas would never look the same again. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. The old story of being overshadowed and ignored was ending. A new story, one she was writing for herself, was just beginning. She looked out at the snow, her breath steady, her heart calm. The storm inside her had finally passed. Maya sat by the window, watching the morning light glint off the snow that had settled overnight. Everything felt quiet, almost too quiet. But this time, it was the kind of silence that promised new beginnings, rather than weighed her down. The events of the past few days, the confrontations, the confessions, the storm of emotions, were still fresh in her mind, but she no longer felt trapped by them. She had finally spoken her truth, and that act had changed everything. Her phone buzzed softly, and she saw a message from Monica. "Coffee later? I'm Azure Chats." A small smile tugged at her lips. She typed back quickly, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Absolutely. Need my partner in crime for some serious hot chocolate therapy." It was a simple exchange, but it reminded her that there were people who truly cared, who saw her not as a problem or a shadow, but as a person with feelings and worth. For a long time, Maya had measured her value by her family's approval. She had bent herself into shapes she didn't fit, spoken words she didn't mean, and carried guilt that wasn't hers. But after confronting them, she realized how much of her energy had been spent trying to earn love that wasn't freely given. The realization was both bitter and liberating. bitter because it was painful to admit that some people would never fully understand her, and liberating because she finally saw that her life didn't have to revolve around their approval anymore. She stood up and began clearing the living room, stacking the mugs from last night's tea, shaking off the last remnants of anxiety. The apartment felt warmer now, not just because of the radiator, but because she carried a new confidence inside her. This was the beginning of a chapter she wrote herself, a story where she didn't have to hide or minimize her feelings. Later, as she and Monica met at the small cafe on the corner, Maya noticed the subtle ways her world had shifted. She laughed more easily, the tension around her shoulders loosening, the weight in her chest lightening. Monica's eyes sparkled when she saw her, and for the first time, Maya felt fully seen without explanation or apology. They talked about everything and nothing. The snow, the upcoming holidays, silly plans to decorate their own tree just the way they wanted. It was ordinary, but to Maya, it felt extraordinary. On the walk back, snow crunching beneath their boots, Maya thought about her family. She didn't harbor bitterness anymore. She simply accepted that some things couldn't be changed. She could still love them, but she no longer needed their validation to feel whole. The anger and resentment that had once defined her holidays were fading, replaced with the quiet strength of self-respect and the courage to protect her heart. By the time she returned to her apartment, Maya felt a profound sense of peace. She lit a candle on the windowsill, its small flame flickering against the falling snow outside. The glow was comforting, a symbol of warmth she could create for herself. She pulled out her journal and wrote a simple line that captured everything she had learned. I am a no. My voice matters. My heart matters. She knew that Christmas this year would look different. There would be no old shadows, no silent suffering in the corner of the family room. There would only be the choices she made, the love she cultivated, and the moments she could cherish without compromise. For the first time, Maya felt free to embrace the season on her own terms, surrounded by the people and warmth she chose. And as the snow continued to fall outside, she realized that endings and beginnings could coexist. Her story wasn't about the hurt or betrayal she had endured. It was about the resilience she had discovered and the life she was determined to build for herself. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and the promise of winter festivities. Lila woke up early, her mind buzzing with both excitement and unease. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. Unexpected confrontations, secrets revealed, and choices made that had changed everything in her life. But today was different. Today, she had a plan. A careful strategy to reclaim her sense of control and ensure that no one could manipulate her or her loved ones again. She dressed quickly, her hands steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Harold Carr, a teal-colored hatchback she had lovingly named Breeze, waited outside, dusted with a layer of frost. As she slid into the driver's seat, she felt a familiar determination settle over her. Lila had learned the hard way that life didn't always hand you clarity. You had to create it yourself. Her first stop was the small cafe where she had arranged to meet her close friend Rachel. Over steaming mugs of cocoa, they laid out a plan that felt both daring and necessary. Rachel, always pragmatic, reminded Lila to anticipate every possible reaction from the people involved in her family drama. You can't control what they do, Rachel said, but you can control how you respond. Every move matters. Lila nodded, absorbing each word like a lifeline. For so long she had felt powerless, caught in the currents of her family's expectations, and past mistakes. Now she was determined to steer her own course. After finishing their discussion, Lila drove to the outskirts of town, where her uncle's cabin stood hidden among snow-laden trees. It was a place of childhood memories, of laughter and warmth, and she hoped it could now serve as a temporary refuge. As she pulled up, she noticed the subtle changes in the landscape. The snow had melted in patches, revealing dark earth, and icicles hung from the roof like fragile crystal daggers. She stepped out, shivering slightly, and inhaled the cold, clean air, letting it clear her mind. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and aged wood, comforting in its familiarity. Lila quickly scanned the rooms, making mental notes of where she could gather supplies and where she might encounter obstacles. This wasn't just about shelter, it was about strategy. She needed to secure evidence, letters, anything that could protect her and help her confront the lingering threats to her family's peace. Every detail mattered. Hours passed as she carefully went through old boxes, uncovering pieces of the past that had been hidden or forgotten. She found letters from her parents' early years, photographs of family gatherings, and even notes from her own childhood that reminded her of who she truly was before the complications of adulthood had clouded her perspective. With each discovery, a quiet sense of empowerment grew. She wasn't just collecting evidence. She was reclaiming her history and the truths that had been buried under resentment and secrecy. By mid-afternoon, Lila had organized everything neatly, storing the items in a sturdy backpack she had brought along. The cabin felt less like a relic of the past and more like a command center, a place from which she could plan the next moves carefully. She sat for a moment by the fireplace, letting the warmth seep into her bones, and allowed herself a brief pause. It had been a long journey, but she was ready for the next phase. As evening approached, Lila returned to town, her mind sharp with purpose. She knew the family confrontation would be inevitable, and she wanted to approach it not with fear but with clarity and control. When she reached home, she found the atmosphere charged with the tension she had anticipated. Her family members were present, unaware of the steps she had taken, and yet their expressions revealed unease, as if they sensed that the balance of power had shifted. Lila stood tall, her voice calm but firm as she addressed the situation. She didn't shout, she didn't plead. She simply presented the truths she had gathered, letting the facts speak for themselves. There was an almost cinematic pause, as her family members realized that their assumptions about her would no longer hold. The letters, photographs, and notes became silent witnesses to her journey, validating her perspective without the need for argument. The confrontation was intense, with emotions rising and falling like tides. Some tried to dismiss her evidence, others tried to question her intentions, but Lila remained composed. She had anticipated these reactions and responded with patience and logic, never once letting anger take over. The experience was exhausting yet cathartic, and by the end, a strange calm settled over the room. There was no complete agreement, no total reconciliation. But there was acknowledgement, an unspoken recognition that Lila's voice mattered and that she was no longer the silent observer of her own life. After the confrontation, Lila stepped outside, letting the crisp night air wash over her. Snow had started to fall again, covering the world in a soft, forgiving blanket. She took a deep breath, feeling both relief and the weight of responsibility that came with newfound independence. The journey wasn't over, she knew that. But for the first time in a long while, she felt in control of her own story. Returning home, she found a quiet moment to reflect. She thought of her friendships, the support she had relied on, and the strength she had discovered within herself. The days ahead would be filled with small victories and difficult choices. But she was prepared. The past had shaped her, yes, but it would no longer define her. She could now step forward into the future she chose to create. That night, as Lila settled by the window with a cup of tea, she watched the snow fall silently, each flake a reminder that life's challenges could be both harsh and beautiful. She smiled, knowing that she had navigated a storm, faced truths that had long been hidden, and emerged with a sense of clarity and empowerment she had never known before. Her journey was far from over, but she had found the courage to live her life on her own terms, and that was a gift greater than any present under a Christmas tree.